The crystal chandelier above her head costs more than she earned in a year. Valeria Morse knows this because her ex-husband once told her, during one of those cutting remarks designed to remind her she'd never quite belonged in his world. Tonight, she's back in that world not as Camden Hartley's wife, but as the woman whose name is printed in the program under featured restoration expert. He doesn't know that yet. Across the marble expanse of the Metropolitan Art Foundation's annual gala, Camden stands with his new wife, 24, blonde, everything Valeria supposedly wasn't. They're laughing, holding court, his hand possessive on her waist. The same way he used to touch Valeria, before he decided she was too ordinary, too forgettable, too her. Well, if it isn't the ghost of failures past. Valeria's champagne flute freezes halfway to her lips, his voice still sharp enough to draw blood. 3 years earlier in Manhattan, their anniversary. You're not serious about this hobby, are you? Camden had said it while scrolling through his phone, barely looking up from the glow of another late-night email. Valeria stood in the doorway of their penthouse study, portfolio in hand. 12 months of night classes, research, and apprenticeships under a conservator in Brooklyn who saw something in her that Camden never had. The Frick collection offered me an internship, she'd whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. It's unpaid, but Camden, it's the Frick, Val. He finally looked up and his expression was the one he used on underperforming analysts. Disappointed, tired. We've discussed this. My partner's wives don't work. They certainly don't spend their days in dusty museum basements playing with old paintings. It's embarrassing. It's art restoration. It's a career. It's beneath you. Beneath us? He returned to his phone. I need you at the Whitmore merger dinner on Friday. Wear the Valentino, the red one. You're good at that, looking the part. Looking the part, never being part. 6 months later, she found the texts. 6 months after that, she was signing divorce papers in a lawyer's office that smelled like leather and the death of her marriage. Present day, Valeria's studio, Brooklyn. The morning the invitation arrived, Valeria was elbow-deep in a 19th-century landscape that had survived a house fire. Smoke damage, cracked varnish, a 2-inch tear through the sky. The owner, an elderly woman in Queens, had cried when she brought it in. It was my grandmother's. Everyone says it's ruined. Everyone was wrong. Valeria's studio was a converted warehouse space she shared with a ceramicist and a jewelry maker. Exposed brick, northern light, the perpetual smell of linseed oil and turpentine. It was everything Camden would have hated. Small. Unglamorous, hers. In 3 years she'd built something real. Pierce and Morse Restoration. She'd kept her maiden name, reclaimed it like a flag, had a waiting list. Last month, the Whitney Museum called about a damaged hopper. Before that, a private collector in Connecticut with a water-damaged Sargent. But the call that changed everything came 4 months ago. A law firm, Bergman and Associates, representing an anonymous client with a significant piece requiring urgent, discreet restoration. A 1920s portrait by a lesser-known American master, damaged in transit. Budget, open, timeline, flexible, requirement. Absolute confidentiality until unveiling. The contract had been thorough, airtight, generous, and tonight at the Metropolitan Art Foundation Gala her work would be revealed. The invitation's embossed lettering seemed to mock her. Camden and Tiffany Hartley, platinum sponsors. Of course he'd be there, he was always there. Her best friend Nadia nearly spat out her coffee when Valeria showed her the invitation. Absolutely not, you're not going. I have to. Valeria traced the foundation's logo. My contract requires attendance. The unveiling is the centerpiece of the evening. Then they can unveil it without you while you stay here, eat Thai food, and watch him suffer from a distance via Instagram. Nadia grabbed the invitation. Val, he destroyed you. Do you remember the first month after the divorce? You couldn't get out of bed. I remember. The words came out harder than intended. I also remember the second month, when I landed my first client. The 6th month when I stopped checking his social media. The year mark when I realized I hadn't thought about him in 3 days straight. And now, Valeria met her friend's eyes. Now I think about the woman who spent 5 months restoring a portrait that museums said was beyond saving. I think about the fact that my name, not his, is in that program. And I think that maybe it's time I stopped hiding. Nadia studied her, then slowly smiled. Then you need a dress that makes him choke on his regret. Camden Hartley was having an excellent evening. The merger with Dalton Capital had closed that afternoon, $43 million in his pocket, his name in the Wall Street Journal by morning. Tiffany looked flawless beside him in Dior, her hand tucked into his elbow like an accessory that actually appreciated its value. Not like Valeria, who'd treated his world like a burden, who'd wanted to spend her time with paint chips and chemical solvents instead of the Four Seasons and the Hamptons. Who'd looked at him near the end like he was the one who'd failed. "Babe, who's that?" Tiffany nodded toward a figure across the room, dark hair, emerald dress, standing alone near the bar. Camden barely glanced over. Some nobody, probably. The foundation always invited the artists and restoration staff, made them feel included before the real donors took over. No one important, but something nagged at him, the slope of her shoulders. The way she held her champagne glass like a shield. Camden, his business partner, materialized at his elbow. "You see the program? The portrait they're unveiling is supposed to be spectacular, restored by some miracle worker. Apparently the owner specifically requested her." The woman at the bar turned. Camden's brain stuttered. Stopped. "Valeria, the Metropolitan's East Gallery was designed to intimidate. 50-foot ceilings, Carrara marble, walls covered in masterpieces worth more than small countries." Valeria had been here exactly once before, on Camden's arm, wearing a dress he'd chosen, smiling until her face ached. Tonight, she'd entered through the service entrance. She showed her credentials to a bored security guard who checked her name against a list and waved her through. The crowd was the same breed as always. Men in Tom Ford, women in couture, everyone performing wealth like a competitive sport. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the particular electricity of people who believed their presence alone was a gift. Valeria's dress was vintage 1960s Halston deep emerald silk that she'd found in a consignment shop in the village. It had cost $300. Camden's tie probably cost more, she didn't care. Her hand found the small card in her clutch, the one from the foundation's director with the evening's timeline. The unveiling was scheduled for 9 p.m., 1 hour. She could survive 1 hour. Ms. Morse. A young woman in all black appeared at her elbow. "Foundation staff. Mr. Kavanaugh's assistant asked me to find you. He'd like to ensure you're comfortable before the presentation. He's waiting near the terrace." Kavanaugh, her anonymous client. "Lead the way." Camden couldn't stop staring. Valeria looked different, not broken and grateful, different, the way she'd looked in those final months of their marriage, like a dog waiting to be kicked. Not even divorce mediocre, different, which is what he'd expected. Weight gain, bad highlights, the visible decay of a woman without his resources. She looked good, better than good. She looked like she'd been sleeping well. Like she had somewhere to be, like she didn't need his world anymore because she'd found her own. It made his jaw tight. "That's your ex-wife?" Tiffany's voice had an edge. She'd done her research when they'd started dating, knew about Valeria the way you know about a predecessor's failures. "She's prettier than you said." "I never said she wasn't pretty." Camden drained his scotch. "I said she was unmotivated. No ambition. She wanted to play with paintings instead of building something real. She looks motivated now." She did, that was the problem. Valeria was talking to an assistant, following her toward the terrace. Moving through the crowd with a quiet confidence that Camden didn't recognize. When had she learned to walk like that, like she belonged? "I'm going to say hello." He handed Tiffany his glass. "Camden, it's polite, we're adults." But his pulse kicked faster as he moved through the crowd. Because some part of him, the part that had never quite gotten over having the final word, needed her to see what she'd lost. Needed her to know she'd made the wrong choice. Valeria saw him coming. Of course she did. In 3 years she'd trained herself to track Camden Hartley the way prey tracks a predator, some survival instinct that never quite shut off. The width of his shoulders in that custom tuxedo. The way people moved aside for him without being asked. Her stomach dropped, flipped, her pulse hammered in her throat. "You are not that woman anymore," she told herself. "You are not small, you are not forgettable. You are the woman who saved a masterpiece everyone said was ruined." But her hands still shook. The assistant guiding her toward the terrace had pulled ahead, distracted by a call on her headset. Valeria stood alone near a marble pillar suddenly exposed. The crowd pressed close. Too close, she couldn't breathe, she couldn't, Valeria. His voice, right behind her. The same tone he'd used to summon her to his study, to his bed. To dinners where she was the decoration. She turned slowly, bought herself 3 seconds by taking a sip of champagne that tasted like metal. He stood there, Tiffany beside him like a prop. Both of them were looking at her with expressions she knew too well, curiosity mixed with pity, the kind reserved for people who'd fallen from grace. "Camden," she said, her voice was steadier than she felt. "Tiffany." Camden's smile was the one he used on bad investments. Polite, dismissive. "I have to say I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this was your scene anymore." Translation: I didn't think you could afford the ticket. Tiffany's expression was sympathetic in the way a person sympathizes with roadkill. "Camden mentioned you'd moved to Brooklyn. That must be quaint." "It is," Valeria said evenly. "I have a studio there." A studio. Tiffany's eyes lit up the way they might for a child's lemonade stand. "That's so sweet. Are you doing like paint and sips? Those are so trendy right now." "Art restoration." The words came out crisp. "I work with museums and private collectors." Camden's laugh was soft, cutting. "Museums, Val, come on, we both know how that career worked out. You took what, 3 classes, did an internship, you quit after 2 months?" "I didn't quit." "You made me quit. I encouraged you to be realistic." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn throughout their marriage, Creed Aventus. She used to love it, now it made her nauseous. "Look, I get it, the divorce was hard, you needed something to fill the time, but showing up here," he gestured at the gala, "pretending you're part of this world, it's sad." People were watching now, a circle is forming, Camden's partners. Their wives, all of them were waiting to see how the discarded ex-wife would handle being put in her place. CTA, if you've ever been underestimated, you know this feeling. Subscribe, her comeback is massive. "Actually," a voice said behind her, smooth as aged bourbon, "Ms. Morse is exactly where she belongs." Valeria didn't turn, couldn't, because the voice didn't match anyone she knew, but it carried the kind of authority that made the circle of onlookers step back instinctively. A man moved into her peripheral vision. Tall, mid-50s, silver at his temples, wearing a tuxedo that made Camden's look like a rental. His eyes, sharp, calculating gray, were fixed on her with something that looked like recognition. "And respect, Ms. Morse." He said her name as it mattered. "I've been looking for you. I wanted to ensure you were settled before the presentation." Camden's face had gone carefully blank. The expression he used when trying to calculate an angle. "I'm sorry, do we?" The man's gaze finally shifted to Camden. It was the look you'd give to something mildly unpleasant you'd found on your shoe. "I don't believe we've met. And I don't believe Ms. Morse requires your input on her career, considering your track record of judgment calls." The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Tiffany made a small sound. Someone in the crowd whispered something that sounded like Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh, as in Julian Kavanaugh, as in the billionaire venture capitalist who'd made his fortune in tech before pivoting to art acquisition. As in the man whose private collection was rumored to rival the Gettys. Camden's face went from blank to pale to a sick, dawning gray. "You're—" he started. Julian extended his hand to Valeria, ignoring Camden completely. "Shall we?" "Your work awaits." Valeria's brain was 3 seconds behind reality. Julian Kavanaugh was her anonymous client. Julian Kavanaugh, who'd been profiled in the Times last year, who'd donated $30 million to the Guggenheim, who reportedly owned a Vermeer, had hired her. And was now standing between her and Camden like a beautifully tailored wall. "Mr. Kavanaugh," she found her voice, took his offered arm because her legs weren't entirely trustworthy. "Thank you." "The pleasure," he said quietly, "is entirely mine. I've waited 4 months to meet the woman who brought my portrait back from the dead." They moved away from Camden's orbit, through the crowd that parted like water. Valeria could feel eyes following them, the whispers starting, phones being checked, people rapidly Googling to confirm what they were seeing. Julian Kavanaugh, with her. Behind them, Camden stood frozen. Tiffany was talking rapid words that Valeria couldn't hear. His business partner had materialized, whispering urgently in his ear. "He thought you were a caterer," Julian said conversationally. They'd reached a quieter alcove near the terrace doors. His hand at her elbow was steady, grounding. His exact words, I believe, were "no one important." CTA, most don't see this coming. Subscribe before the next twist. Valeria's stomach flipped. You heard that? I hear most things. His smile was slight, dangerous. Especially about investments I value. The terrace was quieter, string lights overhead, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the balustrade. Valeria's hands were shaking hard enough that she set down her champagne before she dropped it. I apologize, Julian said. I don't typically insert myself into personal situations. But your ex-husband was creating a scene and you looked like you wanted to murder him but were too polite. A startled laugh escaped her. That obvious? I've spent 30 years reading people. You have the expression of someone contemplating justifiable homicide. He leaned against the stone railing, utterly relaxed. For what it's worth, the portrait is the finest restoration work I've seen in 2 decades. You took something I'd been told was unsalvageable, 3 museums refused it, and you made it better than the artist's original intent. The compliment hit her harder than expected, made her throat tight. The damage was extensive, she managed. The varnish had yellowed so badly that entire sections of the composition were obscured, and someone had attempted a previous restoration that made things worse, and you fixed it. Not just fixed it, you revealed layers of genius that had been hidden for 90 years. His eyes held hers. That's not a hobby, Ms. Morse, that's a calling, and anyone who convinced you otherwise is a fool. The foundation director's voice crackled over the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could make your way to the North Gallery, we're ready to begin this evening's presentation. Valeria's pulse kicked into overdrive. Julian offered his arm. Ready? Not remotely. Good, that means you care. They moved back inside into the current of guests flowing toward the North Gallery. The crowd was packed tight, 200 of Manhattan's wealthiest, most influential patrons. Valeria spotted Camden near the front, his face still that careful blank mask. The gallery had been transformed, dramatic lighting, a raised platform, and at its center, draped in midnight blue velvet, a large rectangular frame, her work. The director took the microphone, did the usual thank yous to sponsors, mentioned the foundation's mission. Then, tonight, we're honored to present a true rediscovery, a 1923 portrait by American master Eleanor Hartwell thought to be beyond restoration. The piece came to us in tragic condition, damaged, discolored, written off by multiple institutions. Valeria's hands clenched. She'd spent 5 months on that painting. 5 months of 12-hour days of microscopic analysis, of fighting with pigments and solvents and her own doubt. But one restorer saw what others missed. Ms. Valeria Morse, would you please join us on stage? The spotlight found her. For one terrible second she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 3 years ago she would have fled, would have made herself invisible. Julian's hand pressed gently on her back. Go show them who you are. The walk to the stage felt like a mile. Every eye in the room is tracking her. Valeria climbed the steps, legs shaking, and took her place beside the velvet-draped frame. Ms. Morse, the director said warmly, would you like to do the honors? She gripped the fabric, looked out at the crowd, found Camden's face in the third row, his expression caught between confusion and something that might have been dread. She pulled. The velvet fell away. The collective gasp was gratifying. Eleanor Hartwell's portrait of a woman in blue had been a ghost when Julian brought it to her. The subject, a young woman in a 1920s dress, had been obscured by decades of grime and catastrophically yellowed varnish. Previous restoration attempts had left bizarre overpainting, artificial shadows, and crude fills. Valeria had spent 2 months just on analysis, chemical testing, infrared imaging. Slowly, painstakingly removing each destructive layer, what emerged was breathtaking. The woman's face, previously muddy and indistinct, now radiated subtle intelligence. Her eyes, Hartwell's signature gray-blue, held depths that hadn't been visible in 90 years. The dress, once a murky navy, now shimmered with layers of ultramarine and cobalt, each fold revealing Hartwell's extraordinary understanding of light. But the revelation was her expression. Previous photographs showed a bland, pleasant face. Valeria had found something else, a slight, knowing smile, a tilt of the chin that suggested defiance. A woman who knew her worth. The applause started slowly, then built. A standing ovation. Valeria stood beside her work, tears burning her eyes, because this was what Camden had called a dusty hobby. This was what he'd dismissed as beneath them. CTA. This is what happens when you bet on yourself. Subscribe. And he was watching, finally seeing what he'd thrown away. Julian Kavanaugh took the stage. The room went silent. When men like Julian spoke, people listened. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying easily. "I acquired this portrait 18 months ago at an estate sale. I was told it was damaged beyond repair, that I should cut my losses, dispose of it, move on." He looked at the painting. "At Valeria, I'm not a man who accepts conventional wisdom, so I researched. I found 12 restoration experts, flew them in, showed them the piece. 11 said it was hopeless. Too far gone, the paint was unstable. The canvas was compromised, a dozen problems with no solutions." Camden shifted in his seat. Tiffany's hand was white-knuckled on his arm. "The 12th expert," Julian continued, "was a woman working out of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. She'd written a preliminary assessment that was unlike anything I'd read. She didn't see damage, she saw potential. She wrote, and I'm quoting, 'This painting doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be revealed.' The artist's original vision is still there, waiting." He turned to face Valeria fully. "Ms. Morse didn't restore this painting. She had a conversation with it. She listened to what Alina Hartwell wanted to say 90 years ago and gave her voice back. That's not craftsmanship, that's genius." The applause was thunderous. Julian took Valeria's hand, raised it like a prizefighter. "The art world is filled with people who can repair damage. Ms. Morse resurrects souls. And I'm honored to announce that she'll be joining my foundation as Senior Restoration Director with full autonomy to build her own team." The room exploded. Camden's world tilted. Senior Restoration Director. Julian Kavanaugh's foundation. Full autonomy. The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense, because Valeria she was extraordinary. The thought arrived like a knife between his ribs. All around him, people were standing, applauding. His business partner was already moving toward the stage, probably to network, to leverage this moment, because everyone wanted access to Julian Kavanaugh and Valeria. Valeria was the access point. Tiffany was talking. High, strained words about leaving, about this being boring, about dinner reservations. But Camden couldn't move, couldn't look away from the stage where his ex-wife stood beside a billionaire, accepting congratulations from museum directors and collectors whose names he'd spent years trying to drop at parties. "You told me she was unmotivated," Tiffany hissed. "You said she quit everything. I thought..." His voice sounded strange, distant. "She did quit. She quit the internship." The memory surfaced, sharp and damning. Valeria's face when he'd told her the frick internship conflicted with his merger dinner. The way she'd folded inward. The way she'd said okay in that small, defeated voice. He thought he was teaching her priorities, showing her what mattered. He'd been wrong. CTA, wanna see Karma's next move? Subscribe, it gets better. The crowd was pressing forward. Someone bumped Camden's shoulder. A photographer's flash went off. On stage, Julian said something that made Valeria laugh, a real laugh, head back, unguarded. Camden had never made her laugh like that, not once. Valeria was drowning in congratulations. Museum curators pressed business cards into her hand. A collector from Boston wanted her number. The Whitney's director mentioned the hopper they'd discussed. Could they schedule a consultation next week? Julian remained at her side. A steady, protective presence that deflected the more aggressive networkers while facilitating the important ones. "Breathe," he murmured during a brief lull. "You look like you're about to hyperventilate." "I might." She accepted another champagne flute from a passing waiter, her third or fourth. Math was difficult. "This is insane. This is overdue." He nodded toward a silver-haired woman approaching. "That's Catherine Aldridge. She sits on the Met's board and has a personal collection worth approximately $300 million. She wants to meet you. Be yourself. That's all you need to be." Catherine Aldridge did want to meet her. And after Catherine came a procession of others, dealers, donors, academics. All of them were treating Valeria like she was someone who mattered, someone whose expertise was valuable, someone worth knowing. Across the room, Camden stood with Tiffany, watching. His face was a war between pride that wouldn't die and the slowly dawning realization that he'd miscalculated catastrophically. Valeria met his eyes, felt nothing. The hold was broken. He cornered her near the coat check. Valeria had been saying goodbye to Nadia, who'd arrived fashionably late and was now buzzing with excitement. Julian had stepped away to take a call, 30 seconds of vulnerability. Camden seized it. Val. We need to talk. She turned. He looked different up close. Older, tired around the eyes, or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years. There's nothing to talk about, Camden. Don't be like that. He tried the smile, the one that used to make her forgive anything. I'm happy for you, really, it's incredible you did this. Yes, I did. And I want you to know, he stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell scotch on his breath. That I always believed in you. I know we had our problems, but I was the one who introduced you to that world. Who paid for those classes? You paid for 2 classes. Then told me to stop wasting your money. His jaw tightened. I was protecting you. That industry is brutal. I didn't want you to get hurt. You hurt me, Camden. The words came out calmly, final. You spent 5 years convincing me I was ordinary, that my passion was a joke. That was the only value I had, was standing next to you looking appropriate. That's not fair. Julian Kavanaugh sees something in me. My clients see something in me. The Met, the Whitney, the private collectors, they all see something, everyone but you. Because I'm trying to protect you from him? Camden's voice rose, people glanced over. You think he cares about you? Men like Kavanaugh collect things. Art, companies, people, you're just his newest acquisition, Mr. Hartley. Julian's voice. I scold. Julian moved between them with the grace of a man who'd spent decades in boardrooms. I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this conversation with your dignity intact. Camden's face flushed. This is between me and Valeria, your ex-wife, who you spent 5 years diminishing. Julian's voice never rose, didn't have to. The authority in it was absolute. I know because I make it a practice to research anyone I'm considering for a significant position. The research on Ms. Morse was illuminating. Valeria's stomach dropped. Julian, I read the Society column pieces your publicist planted after the divorce, he continued, eyes locked on Camden. The ones painting her as unstable, unmotivated. A drain on your rising career. I also read the court documents. Saw the settlement you bullied her into accepting, the way you leveraged your legal team to strip her of nearly everything. Camden had gone pale. So I did more research, found her professors from those classes you paid for, found the internship supervisor from the Frick who said she was the most talented apprentice they'd seen in years, who was devastated when she quit. Julian's smile was a blade. She quit because you threatened to stop supporting her hobbies if she didn't attend your merger dinner, direct quote from the email you sent her. You had no right, I had every right. Because men like you are why women like Ms. Morse spend years believing they're ordinary. He turned to Valeria, his expression softening. I didn't hire you because I felt sorry for you, I hired you because you're the best. I chose to unveil your work here tonight because I wanted the world to see what you're capable of, what he convinced you to hide. Julian took her hand, held it like a promise, then he kissed her not on the lips but on her knuckles. Old world, courtly, respectful, and devastating, the photographer's flash went off. Caught Camden's expression, shock, rage, the dawning comprehension that he'd lost something irreplaceable. Tiffany appeared at his elbow, tugging. We're leaving now. They pushed through the crowd. Camden didn't look back. Valeria watched them go, felt the last thread of connection, of fear, of obligation, of caring what he thought finally snap. Julian guided her to the terrace. The cool October air was a mercy. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That was presumptuous. But he was about to touch you, and you looked like you wanted to disappear. Thank you, her voice was shaky, for all of it, the job, the speech, she gestured vaguely, whatever that was. A statement that you're valued, protected. That his opinion of you is irrelevant. He leaned against the balustrade. I meant what I said about your talent. I've been collecting art for 25 years. I know genius when I see it. He said you collect people. I invest in people, there's a difference. His gray eyes were steady. I'm offering you a position because you're extraordinary at what you do. What happens beyond that, whether we become friends, colleagues, or simply professional acquaintances, is entirely your choice. No pressure, no expectations. The skyline glittered before them, the same view she'd seen from Camden's penthouse, but different, hers now not borrowed. "The position is real?" she asked. "Extremely, six-figure salary, full benefits. Your own team, creative control." He smiled. "Think of it as revenge if you want, or think of it as the career you always deserved." CTA, comment below, was this justice or karma? Subscribe for more. 3 months later, Valeria stood in her new office. Not a warehouse studio, but a sunlit space in Julian's foundation building, floor-to-ceiling windows, state-of-the-art equipment. A team of 3 junior restorers who looked at her like she hung the moon. Nadia had framed the society page photo, Julian kissing her hand, Camden frozen in the background, and hung it ironically by the coffee maker. "Your origin story," she'd said, but it wasn't. Not really. The origin story was the first day after the divorce, when she'd gotten out of bed and taken a class. The day she'd landed her first client. The 5-month journey with Alina Hartwell's portrait brought a woman's defiant smile back to life. The gala was just the world catching up to a truth Valeria had already claimed. She was enough. More than enough. Julian knocked on her open door. "Ready? The Bergman collection just arrived, 18th century miniatures, severe water damage." Valeria grabbed her loupe and examination gloves. "Let's see what stories they're hiding." Outside, Manhattan hummed. Somewhere in it, Camden was probably closing another deal, chasing another achievement, still believing that worth was something you perform. Continue. Deck 10. D rather than something you possessed, let him. Valeria had paintings to resurrect, women's voices to restore, a future she was building with her own hands, stroke by careful stroke. She paused at the threshold, looked back at her office, her name on the door in simple brass letters. Valeria Morse, Senior Restoration Director, not Camden's wife, not anyone's accessory, just her, and that finally was more than enough. The email arrived 6 months after the gala. Subject: Professional Inquiry. Valeria almost deleted it, then she saw the sender, Camden Hartley, Val. "I hope this finds you well. I've been following your work with the Kavanaugh Foundation. The piece in the Times was impressive. You've built something remarkable. I'm reaching out because a client of mine acquired a collection that needs restoration. Significant pieces. I immediately thought of you. If you're taking new clients, I'd like to discuss terms. I know I wasn't supportive of your career before. I was wrong. I see that now. Best, Camden." Valeria read it twice, felt nothing but a distant, mild pity. She hit reply, typed 4 words, "My schedule is full," sent it. Then she turned back to her current project, a 1910 portrait of a suffragette, her face fierce and unrepentant, waiting to be revealed to the world. Some women, Valeria thought, just needed the right person to see them. She was that person now, and she was just getting started. Her story isn't about revenge. It's about resurrection, the kind that happens when you stop waiting for permission to become who you always were. If this reminded you that your worth isn't determined by who can't see it, share it with someone rebuilding their life. Subscribe for more stories of quiet triumph over loud doubt. The best comebacks aren't about proving someone wrong. They're about proving yourself right.